What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Elder Scrolls podcast. My name's Scott, here with Michael and Drew, as always. And today, we are discussing the Daedric Prince of Madness, Sheogorath. So, which one of you guys would like to start us off?
I think as resident daedrologist, that would
never have seen that coming. He is the shadow on your subconscious, the blemish on your fragile little psyche. Basically, he's the Daedra Lord of mental illness, and that's, kind of insidious, kind of dangerous. It's one of the reasons why he's one of the four corners of the House of Troubles. He's not like Malakath. He's not going to test your physical strength. You're not going to get your legs and arms chopped off, but there's a very good chance that if exposed to him a bit too much, he'll lure you into the Isles, he'll drive you insane, and, it doesn't bode well.
He's like...
No, I think he's one of those Daedric princes that are very much motivated, by self-interest, but also just by self-entertainment. Like, it doesn't have to have some long-term goal with what he's doing, and he's the kind of Daedric Lord that inherently you can't rely on. You can call him upon you only for him to help you, or for him to turn on you and drive you crazy, or do something you would never see coming.
I feel like it'd be pretty fair to say that he's the opposite of reason. Like, he's the polar opposite of Jigalag, which is like order, it's methodical, it's everything. And, obviously we'll get into this, but...
And, I mean, you can see why he's so strongly associated with mortals, because if we had to kind of really differentiate between gods and mortals in the Elder Scrolls universe, and I guess like mortals in general in the real world, you kind of assume that gods are to an extent kind of infallible, whereas the human mind is very hard to understand. And it's like, if say you have a physical problem, say you have an illness, it's more black and white if you can diagnose a problem, whereas what's going on in your mind, is a mystery to us with our science, let alone in the world of the Elder Scrolls on Tamriel, where Sheogorath pretty much has free reign to manifest all of your smallest insecurities, whether you have a serious mental illness or whether it's something as tiny as anxiety or something like that. He can kind of get his claws into you and drag you off to the Isles.
And it's quite interesting in how a few of his stories, he actually seems to amplify people's manic or... do you say demented side? It doesn't really
I guess so,
sound
yeah.
right.
The word has kind of been demented.
You know what I'm saying? The themes from dementia in the DLC, those sides, without actually doing anything. Like, there's a few stories where just the fear of Sheogorath alone being out to get you is the reason for your insanity, or what drives you to madness. I think one of those is in the Myths of Sheogorath book, which talks about the wizard Ravate, a mighty wizard, in fact, who basically came to Sheogorath wanting to drive 1,000 men insane. And Sheogorath basically said, all right, as long as you give me 3 days to try and drive you insane. And he did nothing. But of course, Ravate thought that every piece of food would be poisoned by Sheogorath, or the plants would be out to get him, or the people, or things like that. He didn't sleep thinking that Sheogorath could invade his dreams. And so he was driven crazy by nothing.
Well, and I mean, there's another good example of that exact thing in the Accords of Madness with the artist who, uses Vermina for inspiration. And when it's Sheogorath's turn to inspire him, there's a line that says, "Your whispers in his ear were replaced with silence. I severed his link to that from which he found the most comfort and meaning, and withheld the very attention the creature so desperately craved. Without his mistress, this man's character could ripen under resentment and hatred. Now his bitterness is total, and overcome by a madness fueled by his rage, he feeds me in my realm as an eternal servant." It's like, yeah, this guy's pretty messed up, and messed up in a way that he doesn't really need to do anything. He just understands how to manipulate through ways that, thinking outside the box to manipulate your mind.
It's an interesting story, that one, because that's a story that talks about trying to make an artist, make him the most hated. And it's actually when he does nothing, he loses his... Because he's kind of aware that Vaemine is helping him, that this deity is coming to him in his dreams and being his inspiration. And then with Sheogorath, he's not aware at all. And then he thinks, perhaps the gods have, or this deity has forsaken him, or perhaps it was imagined all along that there even was a deity. And so a lot of his artwork then turns to ridiculing like gods in general and the people and kings and nobles.
Because he's like one of those artists that has it's like lots of disgusting, like controversial sort of like art that was really like provocative, and that was all fueled to him by the nightmares from Vaemina that he put onto the page, because they had a bet who could send him make him the most hated, but it's when he got when Vaemina, for I forgot the period of time, it's for a period of years or something, but then all of a sudden he just lost the nightmares and he no longer had the inspiration and so on, and then his art from there just was terrible. I'm pretty sure like he lost the sort of like influence. Maybe I need to pull it.
Yeah, it lost the influence that people liked, but then it actually changed into a new philosophy where he challenged the gods themselves as well as the infantile public and corrupt state for worshipping them. He mocked them all with perverse caricatures, sparing no one and giving no quarter. He challenged the gods in public to strike him down if they existed. So it was this kind of angle you can imagine. And then, of course, he gets executed after finally writing a piece entitled The Noblest Fool, ridiculing the emperor god Tiber Septim for integrating into the pathetic Nine Divines cult. So one of the local kings in High Rock, who was also humiliated by him, executed him publicly to a cheering crowd with a ceremonial blade.
When I try to imagine the art, I think of Pikmin from Fallout 4.
Yeah.
You know, the quest where you get his blade and there's those really unusual paintings. And obviously blood all over the walls and floor.
And it's interesting in this story, and also the other one, which we'll talk about where he fights Hircine. He has a battle of champions with Hircine. All his like decisions seem mad. Like, for example, or they're against reason, like a conventional reason, for this bet, even for the Nightmare one, would be like, okay, I'm going to try and make him mad by doing X, Y, Z and all this kind of stuff. But instead it was a really unconventional sort of like, I'm just going to do nothing. It's just going to be silent. Or the same thing with the bird versus the Were-Daedroth. It's just like, I'm just going to bring this tiny little bird. And you'd seem from a reasonable person would go, oh, the bird's going to lose. But
yeah, especially given the amount of time they actually had with that competition. I'm pretty sure it was 3 years. I can double check that, but I think they actually had a lot of time to go ahead and to create their beasts. Yeah, 3 years to the hour, and then they would do their fatal battle. And so there's a Were-Daedroth, which, just for clarity, because I think it was in the werewolves episode or the lycanthropy episode, we were kind of wondering what is a Were-Daedroth. There's a little more clarity here explaining just how bad it is or how monstrous it is. Let me just find that. Where is it? An ancient Daedroth he summoned and imbued it with the foul curse of lycanthropy. Of pitch heart and jagged fang, the unspeakable horror had no peer, even among the great hunters of Hircine's sphere. So basically, out of everything in Hircine's realm, nothing has ever topped this abomination.
I kind of see a connection with the lack of reason in the way he approaches these confrontations. It's almost ironic, the idea of this great beast created by Hircine, the god of the hunt, being bested by a tiny little bird. And when you think about it, irony is kind of how he came to be in the beginning, because Sheogorath didn't initially exist. It was Jiglag was kind of considered a bit too OP by the other Daedric princes, so they all colluded to kind of replace him with the opposite of his sphere. So he was all about order, and now he's all about madness, and he becomes Sheogorath. So it's ironic. His whole existence is ironic, and you can see that in a lot of his dealings. The same with the Vaemina one, where this artist, all it took to drive him over the edge was silence.
I definitely agree. You can. It's actually funny, just to finish that story, the way that the bird won. I guess we've talked about it before, but just in case there's a new listener, I don't want to gloss over the bird. So it actually just caught some kind of junk. I think the word is detritus, like just
detritus.
Scrap.
Yeah.
Detritus, caught between the eyes of the Were-Daedroth and kind of fiddled at it, and basically made the Were-Daedroth claw its own eyes out. So
nasty way to go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we talked briefly just there about Jiggalag, but one of the fundamental parts we should sort of talk about is that when this whole curse happened, the Grey March comes every era, though it's not really defined, like it seems like a Shivering Isles era or whatever, but every period of time, basically Sheogorath's curse kind of comes off, and then he becomes Jiggalag once more, does the Grey March, destroys his whole realm and brings order to it, only to turn back into Sheogorath and rebuild the Shivering Isles once more. Insane. But obviously, if you've played the Shivering Isles DLC, you play as the champion of Cyrodiil or hero of Kvatch or whatever you want to call the protagonist. They end up mantling Sheogorath, and they become the new Sheogorath, which kind of splits Jiggalag and Sheogorath as individual people. And you can sort of, there's nods in the Skyrim quest when you meet Sheogorath. He sort of says something like a quote about like fun times in the past, where he says something about like a fox amulet or something. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's like referencing a bunch of different guilds and quests from Oblivion about that. But like obviously, as you can see, no matter what race they all sort of are, like when you become if you're a Daedric Prince or you become sort of mantle a Daedric Prince, your form isn't necessarily like, it's not saying Canon, the hero of Kvatch, was a like human looking dude. Like it doesn't matter what you were, it could kind of, you just kind of become this old Sheogorath looking thing, you know what I mean, his sort of form.
I've got a question then. It's an interesting one which there's no clear answer to, I don't think, but if you were mantling a god or a Daedric Prince, how does that work with different aspects of them? Like for example, which we'll talk about, Sheogorath also appears in different pantheons, and to the Khajiit, he is a Skumakat.
Yeah.
So do you mantle that
Yeah,
as well, or is that a separate
No,
thing?
I think
so
it's...
you're mantling the little Alfiq looking
Yeah,
Skumakat,
I think it's...
turning into it like animals.
Yeah, I think it's
like,
all of it. I think because once you're Daedric Princes can present themselves differently to everyone, and obviously like to a lot of people, I guess they're humans and so on, but like the gods that they're most associated with. So the Khajiit, like everything's a cat to Khajiit, and they will even like present themselves physically as that, you know what I mean? Like as a...
and the Nord gods
But
manifesting as great Nordic heroes, rather than anything else.
But it's still like, I think all of those powers are within it, just to manifest differently and different cultural interpretations. But I think it's what you're mantling is still the core entity at the center of it all.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of the hero of Kvatch being any race or anything like that, he's kind of mantling the sphere then, if the sphere is the Daedric Prince, like, because you're talking about like this human character that he's mantling, but then it's also all interpretations.
Yeah, kind of the whole
time.
spirit.
In the same way that because like even if you look at Daedric Princes, like the realm being an extension of their own bodies, like technically you're mantling the realm as well, like as part of the
and
Daedric
everything
Prince,
in it, and all the Daedric artifacts.
Just a quick reference. One of the things when he's talking about the events of Oblivion, he unread like things are like butterflies, blood, a fox, a severed head, and cheese. But like the severed head from the Dark Brotherhood kind of quest line, like blood from the Blood of the Daedra Divine's main quests, and the Grey Fox, like fox and so on. But
I can't help but imagine butterflies as a reference to the opening of the Shivering Isles DLC. Interesting fact, it's written somewhere, how's that for a source, that Sheogorath was, it's something like in the first 3,000 years of his life, he spent it torturing butterflies.
Source, trust me, bro.
Yeah, source, trust me, bro.
There was always that kid in everyone's school. Who would pick the arms off a buck.
Sheogorath's favorite pastime is torture, and Sheogorath himself claims to have spent his first 3,000 to 4,000 years of existence tormenting butterflies before eventually growing out of it. Source, not trust me, bro. It's Skumakat from the Elder Scrolls Online elsewhere. How about that?
I think the biggest takeaway from that is that he was able to grow out of something. I didn't think that was something that gods did. It's kind of like grow up. Kind of always,
it's interesting, isn't
always
it?
are.
In what's strange though, like 3,000 years, like what does that mean in terms of time? Just because time in Oblivion's different.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the times when Daedric Princes and Haskell says it a few times, but if they mention time, they're kind of just using it as a figure of speech to kind of portray the point to a mortal who understands time or who is subject to it. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it gets confusing. I mean, I don't want to go into Kalpas and different things, but yeah, it does get a bit.
Well, we mentioned there
there.
that so there's the Skooma Cat, the Khajiit's interpretation, Sheogorath. But there is also the Kaima and Dunma and so on, and like we kind of briefly mentioned before, that he's one of the corners of the four houses of House of Troubles, and Sheogorath, is basically tries to make Dark Elves go insane. Like that's the challenge he presents, and so on. And one of the things I actually love, and it's just concept art, but it's of a Daedric mask, an armored mask, and so on. It's the comforting face of tendrils, which is supposed to be a Dunma mask as an aspect of Sheogorath. And this was something that they ditched in really going forward from Morrowind. They made it more generic demon armor, but and I mean, it's always looked like demon armor, but what I mean is that it had like a lot of the helmets had like a representation or significance to certain Daedric princes and so on. Like, there's, I think we showed it before, I think it's actually on the thumbnail, but the Daedric prince of, no, it's not Terra, it's the other one. The Daedric helmet of Terra. It's one of the helmets, but it's the one of Boethia that represents Boethia. And I like that, and I wish it's something they would bring forward into the games and so on. But really connecting Daedric armor rather than just generic Daedric demon armor, make it like, you can have the armor, but make some helmets and unique pieces that are connected to the princes. I just think it's really cool. Like imagine, like a Daedric mask of, I guess Clavicus Vile's already got his mask of Clavicus Vile, but yeah.
Well, I mean, look how cool that is, right?
Exactly.
Like that idea applied to all different Daedric princes.
I think one of the most interesting things about Sheogorath as well is there's a text in Morrowind and Skyrim, I forget what it's called, but there's a specific reference to Sheogorath giving mortals more knowledge than they can physically take in, like more than their capacity allows. And it's interesting, especially looking at it through a Dunmer or a Kaima perspective, in that being given like a huge amount of knowledge is kind of like achieving Kim or achieving some form of enlightenment. But it's almost like Sheogorath intentionally throws it at you in such an onslaught, specifically so that you stray from understanding and instead go to madness. So instead of exiting, the mortal realm and achieving Kim, you instead go to the Shivering Isles. It's like he's making you read an Elder Scroll while you're untrained and high on skooma, and you just got no chance. So it's like he's almost fitting with the good Daedra's philosophy of the Sigic Endeavor, but he takes it one step too far in that he purposely gives you way too much.
Yeah, and I don't think he'd be giving all of the nice knowledge to you first either. I can imagine it purposefully being things like the black books and just jamming all that kind of stuff in your brain.
Just to quickly add a tiny tangent related to before, I sent it in the chat. You can have a look, and I'll put it up on screen. But there's actually there's a Morrowind mod that puts the concept art Daedric faces back into the game, the ones that weren't in the original, because there were 3.
Oh,
that looks so good.
That's really cool. I love the names too, like Face of the Forbidden Tickle.
Yeah, like it's cool stuff, and it's like I wish that kind of stuff was back into the games. And yeah, it makes, and like even that one with Sheogorath, it makes Sheogorath a little more intimidating. Like sometimes that's what's cool about, I guess you read about it in the lore and the Chords of Madness and so on, but like Sheogorath isn't just whimsical cheese man. He's like incredibly cruel at times, like just ridiculously, like he's terrifying.
Yeah, we got to see that more. We got to see that more, because I think especially with the Elder Scrolls Online or anything online that Bethesda seems to do, like in Fallout 76, like one of the things that make Fallout so cool are the darker elements, but instead they kind of went like hard emotes and meme energy, and for me at least it definitely helped in killing the vibe. They're doing a similar thing. Like there are great parts in the Elder Scrolls Online and good parts with Sheogorath involved, but there are also more of the fans like cheese, make more cheese jokes, just like like there was this one quest I think I played where or I watched someone play, and he just said it in one quest like a few times, and I was like stop the the cheese thing was cool not because it's cheese,
I was 12.
because no one but also because it was unexpected.
The contrast almost makes it more unnerving. If you know what he's capable of and you see glimpses of it, then when he's being this whimsical cheese guy, it's almost scarier because you know what he can switch to, but instead you kind of get Wallace and Gromit in Daedra form. but you know, at the same time, a lot is done really well. It's just a little bit more of his darker side, and that mask is a perfect example of it. Would really add to his character in game.
That's how Elder Scrolls 6 should start. Wake up, Gromit.
Apparently, sorry. From dialogue in Morrowind, apparently he picked up more followers in Morrowind following the armistice. So when Tiber Septim, took Morrowind and they made the agreement, and that apparently there was more like people that flocked to Sheogorath in secret.
Well, Sheogorath was kind of anti-tribunal as much as the tribunal and the good Daedra were anti-Sheogorath, because obviously you've got the whole situation with Bar Dao, and it's kind of, he's dropped this meteor over Vivek City kind of as a statement to say that Vivek is false. He's, I can't remember the exact words, but he's essentially a mockery of the gods.
In some ways it's interesting, especially in Dunmer culture, but in some ways he could almost personify that like kind of crazy desperation behind kind of like a gambler's mentality, which may sound a bit funny at first, but if you listen or read, it says in many legends he's called upon by one Dunmer faction against another, though whether he betrays or helps those who call him proves unpredictable. So you can imagine it's kind of like hearing like, oh, this faction called Sheogorath and he helped them, and so you think he'll help you, and then he doesn't. But then because it's this unreliable help, a lot of people will get hooked in by hearing good stories, only to find out that when they summon him, it's a bad roll of the dice. At least from their perception, he's probably got his own reasons.
Yeah, he's a bit of a wild card.
Or perhaps not. He is literally a wild card, right? So it's a massive gamble to call upon him. But you can see the appeal when he definitely helps people, but then can also stab them in the back. And it's funny because in some ways he has a lot in common, or might seem to have a lot in common, I should say, with Clavicus Vile, because Clavicus Vile also kind of makes deals, like Sheogorath does make little deals in games with people. It just seems that, not always, but usually Clavicus Vile is somewhat fair, like you can outsmart him, whereas with Sheogorath it's very much his chessboard, and if he wants to throw the pieces all over it and say I win, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. I think the only story out there of Sheogorath losing involves the memory wand, and the story of someone using the memory wand against him. I think that's from Legends. So. It's either Legends or Blades. I can have a look.
Yeah,
it's kind of the idea of like the comedy tragedy masks, the smiling and the frowning, the twin jesters kind of motif is a common one. Like even in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, like a fantasy series I like, there's Opon, which is the god that's part female, part male, and if you're doing essentially what's tarot cards in this universe, and the male form comes up, then it's bad luck, whereas if the female form comes up, it's good luck. And so this thing can be a huge blessing, or it can completely destroy you, and it's kind of similar with Sheogorath in the lore.
Just by the way, I did find it is Legends.
Yeah.
And if anyone's interested in that, it's about Talum. So Talum basically strikes a deal with Sheogorath to make him forget his involvement in the death of his son. Sheogorath agrees, tampers with his memories, but does so he thought he was fighting to cure his son of madness instead. In the end, basically, Talum uses the memory wand against Sheogorath and forced him to recall his memories of when he used to be Jigalag, which pained Sheogorath so much that he was pleading Talum to stop, and then he ends up fulfilling Talum's wishes to let him and his companions free. So that is a very, very, very rare occurrence.
Yeah.
That something like that happens with Daedric Prince.
Yeah. In terms of, like, if I was just to give my subjective opinion on Sheogorath, like, he's a solid part of it.
You hate him.
He's a solid part of the universe and stuff. I just still, I can't get around the sort of like putting him as your favorite, because I feel like sometimes his shtick is just sort of, it's unpredictable and crazy, and so sometimes it's kind of hard to like I often find personally, even like the parts I like of Sheogorath are like some of the lore bits, or like the potential more darker crazy bits, so I can latch onto like those parts of it. But like I'm not really a giant fan of like the cheese, the whimsical. Like sometimes there's parts of it and you see it in the Shivering Isles quest line, like, and the Shivering Isles themselves is a really cool looking realm. But like I like when he says, like, you know, when he's like, you're gonna skip rope with your guts and stuff, and it's kind of like he's saying it so funny, but it's kind of like he's actually deadly serious, and that's what's kind of cool. Like I like him at times, but then he just gets a bit old.
I think Elder Scrolls Online and even Skyrim, like around the time Skyrim came out, and people were like, oh, I love Sheogorath. After playing Oblivion, it felt watered down. Like it did. I mean, Oblivion did a really good job, especially when you consider base game Oblivion before the DLC. When you talk to Sheogorath at his shrine, he's much worse than when they actually do the DLC. They change the original shrine dialogue and make it different, and he really comes to life in that DLC with, you know, the cat eyes, and it's just a interesting.
Yeah, and I think a big factor when people decide he's their favorite is more than just him, but also his realm and his artifacts. Like, you know, his realm is obviously, I mean, arguably the most fleshed out of all of the Daedric realms.
I feel like that's
and
pretty fair.
He's got a ton of extremely cool artifacts as well that are different from just an enchanted weapon or piece of armor. That, you know, while a lot of artifacts in games, for understandable reasons, kind of get dumbed down to be strong weapons or just, you know, slight buffs to something, his artifacts tend to be actually very unique. You know, like the obvious example being the Wabberjack.
Yeah, but I get, my one thing is like, I guess, I mean, maybe like, I don't know, maybe it's just the randomness that sometimes doesn't appeal to me as much. Like it's kind of like
the
it's just like, oh, I can do anything, or like, I mean, sometimes it's fun. It's cool, but it's kind of like, I guess, when if there's like a world or something, and everything is ridiculously alien and random and weird and whimsical, then it ceases to like stand out the same. If that make, like, do you know what I mean? Like, or elements
like Syndrome
of him.
from The Incredibles.
What?
When he's like, if everyone's super, then no one.
Oh yeah.
Basically,
yeah.
That's an epic quote to remember. Nice. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, a lot of his artifacts are like that, aren't they, Scott? Like even the Fork of Horripilation. It kind
do you know
of
it
gives the wielder various.
It's kind
power,
of, sometimes
right?
I feel it's a little bit, haha, I'm so random, XD. Like that's kind of what I get from him, and I'm like,
it's a bit raw.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of like,
yeah. I mean, with the Fork of Horripilation, which, by the way, at least I learnt the word horripilation from that. It's like when the hairs stand up on your skin. This fork smells lightly of roast beef, but it's imbued with an enchantment which excites and synergizes magicka around it and can produce dramatic results when held by certain people. So
that does have like interesting lore connotations when you're thinking about the Elder Scrolls as a song, like the musical elements of it.
Actually, here's a fair thing in his favor. Like, to be fair, heaps of Daedric Prince's artifacts do change, but we don't look at it through the realm of like, oh, it's random and it's always doing different things, because that's not their sphere. Yeah. I know Wabberjack's different because that's designed to literally do a different thing every time you cast it.
Yeah.
But I suppose the Fork of Horripilation gets a pass there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, like obviously they can change in the gameplay, but do you know, for example, like you know how the Mask of Clavicus Val, for example, has a really good story and mythology to it, regardless of how you divvy up its stats and stuff from game to game. You know, whether it's boosting speechcraft or buying prices or whatever, the mythology and the feel of the mask is consistent. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like. Well, I mean, like, look, and so is the Wabberjack is consistently just like doing its like whack things or so on. I guess it just appeals to me less. Like, you know, if someone's like tells you about like the ancient sort of Excalibur, it's like it's kind of got like a thing to it. It's like, I don't know, and it's just like, here's the random stick,
It's-
bang, like it's
Yeah.
I don't know. It just
Yeah,
has less epicness for me, and like
I would say I would actually prefer him to have less artifacts but higher quality ones. Like when you look into some of them, like they're not that interesting. Like the Staff of Ever Scamp is like a meme staff. Another one, it's a joke. It basically just has scamps permanently follow you around. Also associated with Namira, that staff. He's got his own staff. The Staff of Sheogorath, which I think is cool with an eye in it and whatnot.
hey, maybe they should do some
Yeah.
like, and it's obviously it's all gimmicky and stuff, but it would be fun if like, imagine if there was some kind of like mask or something. I don't know what effects, but imagine you're playing Elder Scrolls 6 and there's like a Sheogorath, like some kind of artifact that you put on that's wearable, but then it changes everything to like a hyper saturated and LSD color scheme or something, or like little hallucinations actually happen, so you could actually play a character that is functionally
That
insane.
would be cool.
Like, and that's part of the.
It would kind of
role-playing.
look a little bit like, do you remember that mission in Far Cry where you take something? I think in Far Cry 4 and everything going all rainbow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you might forget, but your screen actually changes in Oblivion when you have, it's either Felju or what's the other one? Green Mote. One of those. When you have it, this screen does distort and go all funny, and you can see double, and it genuinely makes the game hard to play. Like you go to fight an enemy and you like swing and you hit the double and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
like didn't expect that. The Staff of Sheogorath, in terms of its actual effect, besides just having an eye on it, is to like freeze everyone. At least that's what it did in Oblivion.
Yeah.
The Voice of Sheogorath power. It kind of like a paralysis of everyone in a 75-foot radius. Like,
Yeah.
it's a you shall not pass kind of power.
Yeah, I guess like because I like more so like some of the Sheogorath stuff in the lore and kind of what he could be like. I love some of the concept art done for the Shivering Isles and Sheogorath and so on. And
Oh
like,
yeah, the one where he's got the little
the Grummite like steward
on a
yeah.
chain.
And
Yeah, that's really
like, and you-
cool. That would be much cooler than
Like-
Haskell, kind of. I like Haskell.
Yeah.
I do like Haskell, but imagine if Haskell was a Grummite, but with that intelligence of Haskell. Wouldn't that be interesting?
Yeah, but I like those elements. I just guess I'm just down like take down the whimsicalness a notch. It's not like whimsical's not even the word. I guess just it's the memery. You know what I mean? Like this sounds so like pretentious, but like the 12-year-old humor, like the cheese. Like if you just dial it down a bit, and then because it's good that he feels. Like when you're talking dialogue, when he feels unpredictable, that's the best part. When it's like either or, like he's being all happy and friendly and nice all of a sudden, and talking about the whimsical things he loves, but then all of a sudden turns like threatens to skip with your guts and stuff like that. That's the peak, I think.
And I think there's
They
also
haven't
potential
really hit it since 2006.
There's potential as well for kind of weaving in elements of like profound lore coming from him, where it's like you're wading through a load of inane ramblings, and then there are snippets of like actually mind-blowing information about the universe that you can actually decipher from his words or from his writings if you look deep enough, and then I don't know, there's potential there for him to be kind of more associated with the grander scheme of the universe and all the like a stronger relationship with the other gods, as opposed to kind of being a big Lewis Carroll like shout out as a god, which it's fun to go into that because it's aesthetically very pleasing and fun. But he should probably be more tied to Hermaeus Mora than he is currently, because there is a lot of crossover with that and the way Apocrypha functions. So having more examples of him playing off the other princes rather than just a couple of lore sources, really.
Well,
and there is tons of
I
potential.
think it's all kind of, we talked about it before, and Michael did a video on it, the Daedric princes and so on, but like what we'd kind of like to see anyway is more Daedric prince interactions in game, like quests that are perhaps like pit one against the other, and you've kind of got to choose who to help, and like
it also
characterizes
the
them
main.
more.
I 100% agree. I think one of the main advantages of doing it that way as well in the Elder Scrolls 6 is we don't know how long it's going to be until we get an Elder Scrolls 7, but we have all these Daedric artifacts which we all really like. And so you can easily give Daedric Princes multiple quests so that players have an opportunity to collect multiple artifacts from the same prince. So you might have a quest that begins at level 20, and then the next quest for this Daedric Prince procs at level 40, but perhaps the level 40 quest only activates if you've also done the level 20 quest for, I don't know, say Namira, and then that quest will pit you, those two against each other, and you will only get one of their secondary artifacts, and it kind of promotes replayability as well, which
Something
I like.
that just popped into mind. It's somewhat related, but it was just that imagine if Elder Scrolls 6 is actually it's like a free game, but like live service. Like you actually subscribe and they release new sort of like
a battle
content.
pass.
Yeah, like a battle pass, but like there's new Daedric Prince content or new areas or new realms or new stuff that's constantly kind of expanding and adding to it, like they do in multiplayer games. But it's a single player
ESO, but single player.
Here's the new
designed
artifact.
for single player.
But hold on. There's a way that can be done right, though. Just hear me out. Imagine if it was just like Skyrim, so they don't compromise anywhere.
Yeah.
But it would just feel like there's constant flow of DLC. The problem is when you hear that, the connotations there is like, oh, the quality will suffer for quantity and it will be this really gimmicky thing. Perhaps there's microtransactions.
I mean,
like,
I'm not 100% sure, but like obviously it's happened with Elder Scrolls Online, and I'm pretty sure, maybe I'm just guessing at this, but I feel like there is more like DLC land space than the original ESO that's been there. So I wonder if they take a similar approach, but it's all
Given
single
how
player.
many
It's like
DLCs there are, I'd say you're probably right.
Yeah, so like imagine if it is like that, then maybe it starts off and it's like High Rock or Hammerfell or both.
Or both, and it's a big deal, and then they're kind of like, and it's at E3, and we're gonna be doing every province.
I just hope, you don't need to get a second mortgage in order to be able to get all the DLC. Let's just hope that.
Yeah, for sure. That's a big thing. Although, and this could just be like my perspective, but I always found the DLCs back in the day especially to be very fairly priced. Like paying like what, $15 or $20 for the Dawnguard DLC, I was very happy to. I feel like these days that gets you like
half a statue in ESO.
your horse armor, or you don't even get in Fallout 76 you don't even get a power armor paint for that.
Yeah. It's funny how like slowly,
people used to complain. Yeah. People used to complain back then that it was
they still do now. It's just you accept it. Like
Dawnguard.
they're like they complain like because no one likes it, but
the complaint makes
Yeah.
sense. The complaints make sense to me at least now, because paying $15 or I should say $25 wasn't it something ridiculous when we saw the power armor paint and converted it to Australian dollars?
I mean, well,
it was something crazy.
Recently with the video about the Void, I was trying to get a Sithis statue to show off, and it would have cost the equivalent of like 30 to 35 Australian dollars to get.
No, is that including the deal?
Yeah, it was like, well,
it's just raw.
Like 3,000 odd crowns, whatever that translates to. And I mean, like, I've got the Dark Heart of Skyrim DLC, so I'm like, all right, I'm going to go get some footage of the Dark Heart. But wait, you need to go to Markarth, which is a separate DLC. I'm like, oh my God. Like, I really want to like this game, but it does break the bank. Anyway, this is a tangent.
Yeah, I know you've got me on the Elder Scrolls Online store now. I'm trying to like,
because I could be wrong, because I was taking that off of what a forum was saying. So maybe the person was wrong, but it said it was 3,000 and something.
Oh, okay. Well, it's giving me the option to buy 1,500 here for 11 Great British pounds. I don't know.
That's about
it's doing
$17 or $18, I think.
20 apparently, $20.50 Australian. So double that would be $40. I don't know. I don't know if the
look. If I'm wrong, then I very much apologize, and it's not overpriced at all. Nothing about it is. I'll concede that, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely nothing wrong with going down the DLC road. But
DLC as in if it's
reasonable
content, if it's like actual extra areas, new quests, new lands, new items all within it. But if they start selling the items or selling like, here's your new piece for your house or settlement or whatever the hell.
I'm optimistic that would never happen, because I think if there's going to be microtransactions and DLCs, it won't. They will try to avoid detracting from the original experience. And if most items, like a bunch of Daedric artifacts are in the store, then they've kind of screwed themselves for quest ideas with Daedric Princes and things like this. So, like as much as it's fun to be pessimistic, I'm sure Elder Scrolls 6 is very much not going to have any of these practices.
I don't even know if they will do like a live service kind of thing, because I don't know how well it kind of works out monetarily, like the DLCs.
Could I just butt in and say I've done some little web crawling, and I'm seeing forums like, how can I build the Sithis statue without spending 3,500 crowns? So I think you might be justified. Wow. Anyway,
this is irrelevant.
Back to Sheogorath.
Sheogorath was behind
from
this
one
idea.
madness to the other. The Folium Discognitum is another one of his artifacts. It's basically, I like the look of it and the idea that like the pages have these incomprehensible scrolls that move to avoid your gaze when you try to read them. But ultimately, it is just another tome that like makes you crazy, like when you read it, which is very similar to both the Black Books and the Ogma Infinium. I do like the little story behind it about how Archmage Shalador, hungry for knowledge, traded an entire island, wasn't it? The island of Ivea for the tome in the first era, which he went on to regret, and then got the island back. But Sheogorath said, okay, you can have the island back, but he left a bunch of Daedra on it, which for Elder Scrolls Online purposes, you had to go clear that zone. But there's a decent story there for that artifact.
I like to imagine the way the kind of the text moves away from your gaze, kind of like, when those things in your eyes move away and you're trying to catch it and you have to read it out of your peripherals or something. It's like maddening just to think about.
Yeah, it'd be pretty crazy. Gamble Putty, the ambiguous glove. It's just an extravagant right glove from Morrowind, which I'm pretty sure is entirely ceremonial. It fortifies agility, intelligence, personality, and luck at the cost of draining others. Endurance, speed, strength, and willpower. Its main role is ceremonial, used as a sacrificial offering to Sheogorath's shrine. Okay. A glove. And his regalia is, I guess, technically an artifact. You can get his outfit at the end of the Shivering Isles DLC, which on a female looks different. I wonder if you've seen that.
I feel like I have it, and for some reason I feel like I've played a...
There's a dress, there's a Sheogorath dress, basically, if you're playing a female character, which looks cool. And we should mention because it has a good story to it, the Neb Crescent. So this is basically a cursed sword. And when you pick it up, it just makes you go absolutely wild and want to kill everyone around you in a fit of rage. And this was the third and final story in the 16 Accords of Madness text. And that involves Sheogorath tricking Malakath into killing his own son. Yes. I feel like we talked
I feel like it
about
came
that
up in the
story
Malakath
recently.
podcast, which wasn't that long ago, I don't think. I mean, weeks ago.
It's just a perfect example of Sheogorath kind of just contriving the best possible way to not only beat his opposition, but do it in the way that's going to humiliate and upset them as much as possible. And obviously, when it comes to Malakath, his kin matters more to him than anything. So,
what do you think in terms of interpretation? Like, I don't know. Maybe if this is like I know Michael, you're comparing to like Clavicus Vile before about deals and so on, and I was sort of thinking like maybe one of the differences is that like Clavicus Vile is very conniving and is sort of deliberately trying to screw the other person, whereas for Sheogorath, at least the way I sort of envision it, is that he just has a change of heart because he's insane. He just fucking flips and changes his mind. He's almost like you're speaking to a different person at each time. Like maybe now he's completely like, I'll make this deal with you. And so, rather than sort of a malevolentness, like all of his cruelty and everything as a result of his just straight up insanity. Like if you imagine some really unhinged person who is a god, and then all of a sudden, like, he's helping you because you worship him and so on. And then all of a sudden he's having a bad, like, internal drug trip because that's what his mind's all the time. And you look like some evil kind of thing. And then he's like, no, let's kill you, And
yeah, he's very unpredictable. It's like Clavicus Vile with no rules.
Yeah.
There are no rules. And I think if you outsmart him, if he can get his revenge... I mean, Clavicus Vile doesn't always have it, but you feel like with vile that there is this fair play element, like, oh, you got me, like, good on you, mortal.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think Sheogorath would look upon that so kindly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sheogorath would hit you with the "you get what you can deserve" kind of
Yeah.
attitude.
Yeah. Well, I guess
Yeah.
like that's what I guess I want to see from Sheogorath more is proper insanity rather than just haha I'm funny. Like rather than I don't like, you know, adhere to normal norms. I just talk about cheese and like you know.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, if there's one thing I've learnt from this podcast, it's that Scott's obsessed with talking about cheese.
That's my favorite TikTok, that one. Wake up,
to be fair,
Gromit, we've got
cheese
to
is-
hide the body. There's no dogs in prison, Gromit. You'll be put down.
Anyway, what else is there to say about Sheogorath? I suppose, you know, earlier how I was talking about one of the myths of Sheogorath. So there was this wizard, Ravate, who was the one who wanted to make people insane. And then Sheogorath made him insane. This is from a text called Myths of Sheogorath. There's 3 different myths, but are they just myths or are they real? How do we know?
I don't know.
Like, is it a fantasy? Is it fiction, or is
You
it
can't
real?
know. Myth
There's
is
an interesting
myth can be real, and the
myth
other
makes myth makes reality. That's true. There's a little story there called Sheogorath Invents Music, which is just pretty grotesque, but sums him up pretty well. And it basically is he's looking at the mortal realm. He's looking at Nirn, and he's thinking, gosh, this is so boring. And this woman comes to him and talks about how, the sounds of the birds are so beautiful. Oh, she just comments it to herself, I think, actually. She's nearby. She's like, the birds are so beautiful. And then Sheogorath silently agrees with her and thinks, yeah, but it's a shame because the mortals can't, make the beautiful sounds that certain creatures can. And so to give mortals music, he kills this woman. And he just rips her to pieces, and from her tendons he makes lutes, and from her skull and arm bones he made a drum, from her other bones, I'm assuming, he made flutes, and he presented these gifts to the mortals, and thus music was
just
born.
as to like the talking about myths and which like if they can be real or not. I guess a good framework to work with the Elder Scrolls too is that even in you can look at Michael Kirkbride and a couple of other people that have talked about like world building in general. They'll say, what does it's going along the lines of like, what does the king think? What does the commoner think? Like, what does the dog think? And like these different stages of belief. So like this kind of myth might make more sense to someone who like might be a peasant, like doesn't have an understanding and like an arcane understanding of things. Like all of these myths come from different people from different walks of life who have different levels of understanding. So when you're looking like, if you're us looking at the law, we're just looking at it with like a total and all knowledge. But you got to remember, like all of the people inside the universe don't have access to this full understanding. Like, because a lot of it's illegal too in the Empire. Like a lot of Daedric Prince understanding, you have to kind of join Daedric cults or be part of big magic institutions and stuff to really get a lot of.
And to add to that as well, it is an easy way to reconcile conflicting accounts and whatnot. But because of the Kalpic system, the idea that, the universe has its cycles where everything ends and begins again in slightly different ways, but the cycle keeps going, is you can reconcile all kinds of myths where, some may say that Ifrei started, he created music in his Song of Forests and things like that. Or maybe Sheogorath did it in this instance, but you could easily say that in the dawn of another Kalpa, different gods were responsible for different things, and who we consider to be ancestors and Daedra isn't necessarily the same in every Kalpa. So there's
the kind of
their myths can be built up despite them not working alongside what we currently know.
Yeah, it's a bit of whack part, but like one of them, I think it's in the Complete Guide to Gods, but the idea that all of the creation stories are kind of like equally valid in ways, and like there's evidence for all of them. Like for example, like Sovngarde gives validity to Shor, and the sort of Nordic understanding of like Shor's death fighting against elven gods and so on. Whereas you go to the Khajiit stuff and elsewhere, which gives validity to their version of creation events, and it's kind of...
It's so cool, isn't it, that instead of like, oh, we don't know whose story's real, it's like all the stories are real.
Yeah, and the way... Because the Dawn era, remember, when you come when you come around in the Kalpa, like, it's kind of the time, like, there wasn't like a linear sort of time yet. It wasn't... It's all insane.
It's all a jumble of endings and beginnings.
Woozy.
Yeah.
It is interesting, actually, in that Myths book, that wizard Ravate once walked the winds of time to find Lord Sheogorath. I wonder what that means, because winds of time, specifically winds and time, start with capital. Like, they kind of made it sound like an actual thing, not just like, oh, the passage of time. Do you know what I mean? Like the winds of time with the capital letters. It's quite cool. My favorite story, actually, in the Myths of Sheogorath text is actually the one with King Lyandir. Do you know the story of King Lyandir?
You gonna tell us?
Well, well, it's quite long, but I do like the whole thing. I'll try and give you the cliffs, which is basically, there's King Lyandir, and he is extremely rational. Like, he's a very logical thinker, and the people in his kingdom like him because he makes good decisions. And he decides to live in a palace that's small. It's not grand. There's no art in it. He doesn't waste a single penny on extravagance. And because of his good decisions, his city is quite prosperous, and his citizens, they don't follow the frugal example, and they they make houses that are beautiful to look at, though not very practical. And they devote time and energy to art, and they have these lavish festivals to celebrate, and they're a happy society. And so, stage by stage, to try and show his people how to be more like him, because he thinks that they will benefit greatly from it, he puts more and more restrictions on the town. So, at first, he basically says, all new buildings must be super simple, unadorned, and no larger than was necessary to function. The people didn't like this, but life goes on. But then, because they save money by not spending it on housing, it just goes into their celebrations and art and that kind of thing. So then he basically bans the next thing, which is art. He bans all art in the city. But then they devote even more time and money to parties and festivals. And then finally, he bans parties and festivals. And so as a result, they get so desperate for help that they go and pray to the gods, and Sheogorath comes along to help him. And Sheogorath essentially appears to the king in a dream. And I like this description because he appears not as a flower, but a field of flowers. And instead of the petals, they're all arms. And in the middle of each one is the face of Sheogorath. And he says, I am Lord of the creative and Lord of the deranged. Since you have no use for my gifts of creativity, I have decided to bless you with an abundance of my other gift. And from that day on, every child born into that city was born into madness. And it took a while too, because, you can't really tell a kid is mad when they're so young. But eventually, after a few years, people realized that everyone being born was mad. And one of these mad people was the king's son. And there's this cool moment, and the king doesn't change his ways still, in spite of this. His son ends up killing him when his son is 12. He stabs him, and he goes to his son, why did you do this? And his son goes, it is the most practical thing I could do.
It's pretty
which
sus.
is, quite an but it's quite an ironic demise. It's like that hyper rationalism. Oh, I just did the most rational thing. And also, it's not like some super fair outcome, but Sheogorath's never like incredibly fair. And so then he becomes king. He orders all of the palace servants slaughtered. He throws a grand festival serving a stew made from the carcasses of the palace servants. And orders the east-facing walls of every building painted red, the west-facing walls painted in stripes. All citizens must wear ornate masks on the back of their heads. He burned down the palace then to construct a new one. He didn't want his personal chambers to have any door for fear that small woodland creatures would attack him. He ordered that it have no windows for fear that the sun and moon were jealous of him and plotting his death. And so ends the line of King Lyandir. and the city returns to their grand works and crazy celebrations, and Sheogorath now blesses the city with its more than its fair share of highly creative and artistic people.
That's pretty cool. Actually, I like that story. That's a good one.
Yeah, me
That's a
too.
good
It's my
one.
favorite.
And like that's the kind of Sheogorath I just want to see more in game, like that kind of level of insanity. But it's also, as we were just talking about mythology and like whether there's validity to it. To me, it kind of sounds like a Breton king, maybe, or so on. But one thing you got to
It doesn't say.
Yeah,
That's
it's
the thing about
vague.
these myths. You don't know where they are, but,
But
landed
in the way
you can
that like
imagine.
believes myths can be believed, it's the same as like like King Arthur is completely fictitious, but it becomes like an important myth, and people, the reason it like it keeps going on, like people going, oh, that didn't happen necessarily, because they can kind of, you can trick like people into believing it over centuries or so on. You know what I mean? Like people can kind of, and like how they suggest that like lots of like characters, like that even King Arthur is like an amalgamation of a bunch of different kings that did the things, and it kind of comes out in this like little myth or something. Like I wonder what the truth is behind the King Leandir stuff or something, or if it's just a cultural myth, or there was any like root in actual history. But you just remember, like from the point of view, like all of these myths to me, for some reason, like they seem very like from someone without like an expansive understanding of Sheogorath. Like it doesn't sound like a myth, I guess, that like a sorcerer is telling you or something. It sounds like a myth that the common folk are
you could
talking
hear
about.
it. Yeah.
Whereas some of the
for
others,
sure.
like maybe the Accords of Madness, sometimes seem like kind of more real.
They're a bit
I don't know, the way they're
advanced
written
as
I don't know.
well.
But it's cool. That's what I
Yeah.
love about the Elder Scrolls. Like unreliable narrator is just this. Maybe this is, I don't know if this is a hot take or if it's a lukewarm take or whatever. But just like I think it is the best for world building. Like unreliable narrator.
definitely.
Like you just the second you start giving like concrete answers, it loses its.
Yeah.
It's
Not only does it
juiciness.
keep it malleable and allows you to make changes, but it makes it more realistic and believable because
Yeah, and like
Yeah,
it's the kind of
that's
thing,
how
and
it
like
works in
what
real
like
life.
a drive for humans and everything has been. A lot of it's been like exploration and learning and so on. But when you learn it, or you know it, or you see it, you kind of take it for granted, and it stops being this sort of exciting discovery of new things. So yeah.
And I think that's probably part of what Sheogorath wanted to prove to that city, that life is not so straightforward and logical, and not everything has to make sense. I do like the idea that he is called a Sithis-shaped whole of the world, and was born when Lorkhan's divine spark is removed.
Right. So that's suggesting is born.
That's from Varieties of Faith.
Born when Lorkhan was created. Was ripped had his heart ripped out, and Mundus was created. Right.
I mean, it would make sense that a god so involved with mortals kind of needs, mortals. I mean, it just, I can read you exactly what it says. Its contemporary sources indicate that his roots are in Old Mary creation stories. Therein, he is born, in quotes, when Lorkhan's divine spark is removed. One crucial myth calls him the Sithis-shaped whole of the world.
I love that
I
kind
want to think about that more because I feel like there's
Yeah.
potential there for a good video and like a lot more
Yeah.
information that isn't immediately present. But yeah, go on.
I'll send it to you as a reminder.
It's I just love I love all of this sort of mythology and stuff and development of myths. What's even crazier to consider is like obviously for gameplay reasons they don't have like different languages and so on, but when you consider that all of these like they would have differing languages and so on, like there is like they say there's Aldmeri and Dwemer languages and stuff like that, so obviously in the Somerset Isles the reality would be that they're all sort of speaking like an Aldmeri language, like their native language or so on. But then you have these like myths as you go further and further back. It's like I wonder what they called these things as ideas or so on as you get really, really ancient. Like in Nedic mythology, some early tribesman stuff, there's references to like I forgot, it was like an animism kind of thing, but they call it the bee or something, the mother bee or something. And there's kind of connections. I forgot what video it was. I was connecting it to Mara because Morwa, in Hammerfell, is seen often with beehive.
Was it the video of the Aelid Kings?
Perhaps it was that, but I don't know. But that but yeah, anyway, it's just interesting that like a lot of these gods could go by completely different kind of concepts or names or whatever in ancient times. And you get different nods to different things, like, you know, in Aelid King's one of them was the insect god. Maybe it was that, and I was going further to try and connect it to whatever's there, because there's not a lot to connect insect god, but could also be something.
Well, and you can see it in simple examples like Elysia as well, is that if statues are erected of figures who are important to you or gods, you're going to portray them in ways that are familiar to you. So, you know, in the arena district, Elysia just looks like almost just looks like a noblewoman in a nice dress. But then you see other depictions of her where it's much more tribal and bestial and influenced by the Iliad culture at the time.
A really good example of that, I think it's in the same area, is the Mora House is a man. He's just a man in armor and so on, because they start like perceiving him like that, I guess.
Yeah.
Because you know, a big bull with wings might not be palatable to the future empires of man.
I suppose as a final thing to say about Sheogorath, unless you two have other insights, is about how those who worship him seem to find the best in all of the mental struggles that the various inhabitants of his realms have. There's a text, The Blessings of Sheogorath, the 13 blessings, and it says, "Blessed are the madmen, for they hold the keys to secret knowledge. Blessed are the phobic, always wary of that which would do them harm. Blessed are the obsessed, for their courses are clear. And the addicts," I'll skip the blessed are each time. "The addicts, may they quench their thirst that never ebbs. The murderous, for they have found beauty in the grotesque. The fire lovers, for their hearts are always warm. The artists, for in their hands the impossible is made real. The musicians, for in their ears they hear the music of the soul. The sleepless, as they bask in wakeful dreaming. The paranoid, ever watchful for our enemies. The visionaries, for their eyes see what might be. The pain lovers, for in their suffering we grow stronger. The mad God who tricks us when we are foolish, punishes us when we are wrong, tortures us when we are unmindful, and loves us in our imperfection."
That's pretty wholesome, considering the subject material. Yeah.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, wraps up the Elder Scrolls podcast today. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. You can reach out to us on social media in the comments below, or pick up some sweet FudgeMuppet merch. My name's Michael, and we all look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.